Are you going to ask questions or what?
No, to an extent, I'll be asking some questions.
Okay,
And
but
so
look
the
at her.
sound of my question would
Okay.
just be something cut off. And then when you answer it, if I say, well, what about the food? And if you said, terrible, they wouldn't know. So your answer should be, the food was terrible.
Tell as if you're
Okay.
telling the story, not be answering a question.
Okay,
Okay.
so and I should look at Harriet.
Yeah.
Harriet's
Right.
eyes?
And Harriet's eyes, you can look at the camera, Harriet's eyes, you can...
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm Rosemarie HOYT WEBER, and my nickname in camp was Mimi, which means cow. I was born in 1931, March 9th, in Manila, at St. Paul's Hospital in Intramuros, which is the walled city. My parents, Eve and Neil HOYT, had a miscarriage in they married in 1927. In 1928, they lost a little girl, and then they had me in March of 1931, and they always wanted more children, but they were looking into adoption, but because of the war, it didn't work out. So okay, now, let's see. My parents went over there to teach, and they taught in Cabanatuan. And that's how we knew my father was in Cabanatuan, because when he sent a card to the prison camp, he said, I am where we were when we first taught. Of course, the Japanese didn't know what, and so they didn't scratch it out. So that's how Mama knew he was in Cabanatuan. I always had prayed for a brother or sister, but it just didn't work out. So I ended up by having, as you know, 9 children, and my dad never got to know any because he died. The last time I saw my father was Christmas Eve, 1941, and we said the 23rd Psalm in the garden of Roy and Margaret Bennett. Roy Bennett was the editor of the Manila Daily Bulletin, and when the war started, December 8th, he invited us to, of course it was December 7th in the States, but in the Philippines it was December 8th, which is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And actually I think it ended on a special feast day of the Blessed Mother too, August 15th. So anyway, to go back to December 8th, I have a terrible thing to say. The first thing I learned, when I learned there wasn't going to be with the war, my first reaction was, oh, great, there won't be any school. I mean, I can't believe I said that, but I did. So my father and I said the 23rd Psalm in the garden of Roy and Margaret Bennett, probably maybe around Christmas time. And the last time I talked to him was Christmas Eve, and I cried all night because I was very close to him. He kept saying, Mimi, I'm going to be okay because I'm in the quartermaster, and the quartermaster is safe. But of course now we know that nothing is safe. In fact, even in the city of Milwaukee, you get killed crossing the street. And I'm sure that happens perhaps in Washington, D.C. So we went to stay with Margaret and Roy Bennett. We never saw our home again because when we came back, Harriet, in 1945, our home was destroyed, as were many homes. We stayed in the Bennett's house, and I broke something that was very special. I can't remember what. And my mother was devastated. But Margaret Bennett said, Eve, if that's the only thing we lose in the war, we'll be blessed. And she was so right. Margaret and Roy did survive the war. He was put in Fort Santiago prison because he would refuse to continue to do the Manila Daily Bulletin for the Japanese because he knew that everything would be slanted the way they wanted, and so he was crucified in many ways, but he did live through camp and lived even afterwards, and Mother and I visited him in 1945 when we returned. When The first thing I remember about camp, my mom told me that I love to play with bugs. And but the first night, I was in the annex because I wasn't 11 yet. I was sitting on the toilet, and these two huge cockroaches came running under the door, and I just screamed and ran out and then ran to my mom. And I was, ever since then, I've been scared of cockroaches. However, I think I've made some progress because today, August 26th, at Fontana, where I'm being interviewed, I was in the bathroom and a beetle came in and I just ignored it. So I have made progress since 1942 to 2003. We stayed with the Bennons, and we knew that the Japanese were going to come and pick us up. It was just a matter of time. We had no more contact with Daddy except 3 postcards from the Cabanatuan military prison camp. Well, one day, maybe January 6th or 7th, there was a heavy knock on the door, and the Japanese were there, and they told us that we could bring something for 3 days. My mother chose, because we were only going to stay there 3 days. Of course, I don't think they really knew how long we were going to stay there. Anyway, my mother brought the family Bible that my dad and she had read from cover to cover, and my baby book, and the third thing I can't remember. So we hopped into the back of the truck, terrified, of course. Margaret and Roy Bennett continued to stay in their home. Because Roy was sort of a special person, we didn't know that he would never come until later into Santo Tomas area. He came he went directly to Fort Santiago prison. Margaret came later. She was able to stay out because she stayed with some German sisters and took care of her mother. Mom and I went in there January 8th, and we stayed there for 37 months. And I'll go back, but on the 3rd of February, I was sitting in the room 40A, and I was eating my cereal. By that time, we were only given 2 meals a day, and so my mother and I would split it. We'd eat one for breakfast, and then something for lunch, and then we'd eat half in the supper. But on that day, February 3rd, my mother was in Santa Catalina Camp Hospital. She was, she had a lot more sickness than I did. Plus, she gave me her food, as mothers do. Anyway, I heard what I thought was raindrops. I looked outside, and there wasn't any rain. And I thought, what is this noise? I'm talking to myself, And it was bullets. And we started screaming, the Yanks are here, the Yanks are here. And we ran downstairs, and John Hankey, who was coming to Dayton in October, was one of the first men of the 5 tanks to break in. We ran downstairs, and it was just, we were just screaming and crying, and I wish Mom could have been there. And of course, I was alone. There were 40 other people in the room, and they took care of me, but everybody kind of just, and I can remember my first piece of bread that I hadn't had for 37 months, and candy bars, and it was very tremendous day, and the men looked so big. And as I told Harriet and Bonnie earlier, I was so excited because I thought that they were all Catholic because they had the, I can't think of the word, what do you call it? Dog tags. And I thought they were medals. So I thought, oh wow, great. And all these Catholic men have come in to save us. But anyway, so we'll go back to January 8th. I stayed in the annex, which is where, with my mother, which is where people that weren't 11 yet could stay. And the food was better. The Japanese, we were told, did love children. And of course, the program we saw yesterday indicated that too, that they did love children. So I have to say that is correct. But then when I was 12, I went to, it was either 11 or 12, I went to the main building, and I was in room 40A in the main building. And Mother and I, we slept next to each other in separate beds. And they had slats, wooden slats, and we kept everything under the bed. And we went down for food, and we had meal tickets, which I still have. And the food was, well, in the annex area, the food was better, but in the main building, it was like, I don't remember any good food, but we had lugao, and then we had worms, and we ate the worms because they were protein. And I guess for Christmas, one of the Christmases, the Japanese gave us one carabao for 3,700 people, so they didn't get too much. But there were, we, as Karen Kern said, people did take charge, the Americans, and people said that, you know, well, I was a child, so I went to school, but I remember going to school on the roof, but, and we had to climb. That was the roof of the main building, and this was the horrible thing that I didn't want to do when I learned that there was going to be war, which is not a very nice thing to do, but I guess that was a kid. So we could not have geography or history, but we could have all the other subjects. And I must say that I did go 5th, 6th, and 7th. I didn't finish the 8th grade, and I went into high school on probation. I didn't absorb as much as some of the other students. I just didn't. We always kept hoping and praying that Dad would survive. In fact, Mom lived until 1981, and even the day before she died, she kept saying, because Dad was on this Eris on Maru that was sunk by mistake by our own forces in 1944 on October 24th. And for those who might remember, years ago in the Catholic Church, that used to be the Feast of St. Raphael, which means God heals. And that was a big comfort to Mom that Daddy died on the Feast of God Heals. And then I married Ralph, which of course comes from Raphael. But I didn't marry him because of that. I married him because I loved him. But anyway, we didn't learn this until well, we came back to the States in April of, we were released in February 3rd by the 1st Cavalry and the 44th Tank Battalion. And then we went out, Mother and I went to, because she was very ill, she had 2 kinds of dysentery, bacillary and amoebae. So she almost died, and how she lived was her strong Norwegian determination and the fact that she had to take care of her amoebae. So we went to the 54th Evacuation Hospital, which was set up by the soldiers, and also the 80th General. And we stayed there. We went from February 3rd, and then we left sometime in April. And the reason why I remember that, because as I mentioned to you and Bonnie, my recall isn't so good. I do remember that on board ship, as we were coming to the States, President Roosevelt died. So it was, when I don't know when that is, but whenever he died, we were on the seas. And during the time of the way back, I don't know how long it took, I developed chickenpox. And all the doctors who were young men, they thought it was impetigo. So I was treated for impetigo, which is very painful if you have chickenpox. And this Navy nurse said, that kid doesn't have chickenpox. No, I mean impetigo, she has chickenpox. So then I had to be put in sick bay, and I had a ball because I was over where all the, Navy men were. And I had better food, I wasn't in the hole, with all the other people. Although Mother, because she was so ill, she got to stay in a cabin with Mrs. Hornbossel, who had leprosy. And I don't know if any of your interviewees have mentioned that this woman was on board ship with leprosy. And so she couldn't be, because it's contagious, she couldn't be in with the regulars. So going home was on the Admiral Eberly, and it was called the Floating Institute of the Destitute Prostitute. And I guess I don't have to explain why. But anyway, of course it was blackout. And I know there's a point to my story. Oh, one day there was a very sad happening. And I didn't know this because I was in sick bay. But we were taken up to by then I was over the chicken pox. We were taken up to top deck, and the ship basically stopped. And taps and revelry was played, and there was a young girl who was 12 who had died in the hole of a brain tumor. And because we were so far from the States, she had to be buried at sea. So she was put in a gunny sack and lifted up and pushed into the ocean. And I didn't know her, but I'm sure it was very hard on her mom and dad. So I still remember that, and that was a long time ago. So I do have some memory, but not as much as I'd like. So then
being scared.
Yes. Pardon?
Being scared?
Yes, being scared. Okay. So go back to prison. We were made to bow from the waist down. And I was, in fact, my whole prison camp, I was terrified. Scared that I wouldn't, well, first of all, that we wouldn't get out, that we wouldn't have enough food to last. I remember asking Mom, why are so many people dying? And Mom said, because they've given up hope. This was towards the end. And that was, Mom was very religious. I guess that's pretty obvious. Excuse me, can I clear my throat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can have a drink of water.
Okay. I remember one time I was walking in the annex, and I didn't see this guard, and I forgot to bow, and I was really scared because I thought he would hit me, but he didn't. So we did have fun in camp. I played with Barbara Mood, and Jane Donner was always so kind to me, and she kind of took over me, and she knew my mom, and of course Daddy never came into camp, but she knew of my dad. And she was the one that encouraged me to come to the different reunions. Because of our large family, we weren't able to come early on, but we did come. And I guess when I was released in February 3rd, 1945, I remember my first reaction was that now I'll never have to be afraid again. Because I spent so much time being afraid in prison camp of not bowing or not having enough food or mother dying. But when I got out, I wasn't afraid anymore. And of course, that's not really true because I still have fear. So fear, I guess, is a part of life. So I'm going to stop. What else? I mean,
I don't know. Do you have, jobs?
Jobs. Okay.
Okay,
I
after you
didn't
take a
have any
drink.
jobs. Yeah, I didn't have any jobs because I was. My mother did. She worked in the. I can tell about
Okay,
that.
okay.
And then I can tell about. Is that enough about pre-war?
That
Yeah.
sounded good, yeah. Kind of sets, because that's the question people have. What were all these people doing in the Philippines? So we understood that, and
Yeah. Okay.
okay.
And so I shouldn't go back to pre-war anymore.
Well,
I don't have to.
Is there something you want to talk about?
It's just that Joe Thomas put my pigtails in the inkwell when I was in 4th grade, and I got sent to the principal. But this isn't
back
really.
up.
But this
Why
isn't
not?
really.
Why not?
Okay.
Are you recording all the time? Oh,
Oh, Okay.
No, that's fine.
Well, okay. Well, one bad thing happened in school was I was sort of good. Well, one time Joe Thomas and his sister Ellen was the one who ran the reunion in San Diego. I don't know if Bonnie came to that or not. But anyway, he was teased me. Of course, I didn't have any brothers or sisters, and that always made me sad. But he put my pigtails in the inkwell, and so I turned around and threw my boots at him. But the teacher didn't see that, and she sent me to the principal, and I got in trouble, but Joe Thomas didn't. And I'm going to find him someday, and I'm going to scold him. So that's pre-war. And then to go back to camp again. Oh, I know one time I was terrified. We were told early on, and I can't remember when, how early, but if we tried to escape, like to jump over the fence or anything, we would be executed. So there were 3 British men who did try to escape. I believe they were British, I believe, and they were caught, and I think they had to dig their own graves, and then they were shot. So that was a very frightening incident and a very tremendous learning experience that you don't disobey. School was okay. Our teachers were wonderful, and as Karen said, it was a regular city, we had teachers and doctors and nurses. And I remember when I was 12, I had my ears pierced, which I still have. And I also remember a funny joke, which I can't remember, and who told me, and I still tell it. Because when you stand in line now, and people are going, they're so frustrated because they have to wait. And so I'll tell them this joke, and then this will make them laugh. Or maybe they're laughing because they think I'm crazy, or because the joke is, wait a minute, I have to think about it. What is it? Gosh, can you wait a minute?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Patience is a virtue, and virtue is a grace. And grace is a little girl that wouldn't watch her face. And when I tell that story to people that are standing like at a post office line, and I do often, because life is too short to be frustrated. I usually write letters in the post office. Sometimes I write 2 or 3. So anyway, maybe that makes them funny, laugh. But I had many friends in prison camp. The Chittick family, they were in our room, as was Karen Kearns and her mother, Thelma. Dagmar, I never got to see after the release period because she died, but I have seen her sister Pat. And Pat Chittick came with us in 2000 to the Philippines with Sasha. I don't know if Bonnie knows Sasha. And she's arranged 2 trips to the Philippines, and I'd like to go again. And the next time I'll bring you and Bonnie. So,
We have that on tape now,
okay. So, shall we stop a minute? I'll just think. Now, what?
Yeah, great.
What else?
Do you know what I realized, although he now has disappeared?
Yes.
We gave Ralph a hard time about not wanting to interview him, but I thought it might be interesting to have him comment on what it was like to spend all of these years with someone. What difference does he think it made? I think that might be.
You know what he says? The preparation for our marriage was Santo Tomas. But I'll let him tell it. He may not.
Okay, I think he's got
Okay.
Is there any other story you would like to tell?
Well, just, yeah, couple. One, how we had so many priests in camp, and that's one thing the Japanese didn't forbid. I'm not on tape, am I?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, I am? Okay.
It's fine. You
Okay.
can just talk.
There are 70 priests in camp, I think, and very few nuns. The nuns, as I believe, went to St. Los Baños. The priests, the Japanese, did allow us to have religious services, Catholics and Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians. I'm not sure about the Jewish faith, I don't remember. But we used to have Mass, and that was a great comfort for those who wished to go. And we had, well, for those who aren't Catholics, the Blessed Mother is not worshipped. She is looked up to because she is the mother of Jesus. And there are 2 months that are kind of special for her, May and October. So in May and in October, we had special devotions in Santa Catalina Chapel. And I remember going there. And one, only a person that was Catholic would know this, but there was called the Litany of the Blessed Mother. And I was sick a lot in prison camp. And I can remember one of the health of our sick was one of the prayers. It's like, well, and I would say health of our sick real loud, hoping that the Blessed Mother would hear me and help me get well, because I just had a lot of illness in camp. But I had a wonderful mother, and she was, and she told me after we got out, she said, don't ever hate our captors, because that will never bring your father back. That's just what war is all about. So then, I just have to tell you one more thing. When we came back to this country and we learned my father was killed, and it was just horrible, devastating. My mother kept going, and we went to live with my dad's mom, and we lived there 2 years, and then the junior and senior year, when we came to San Diego, and this is where a miracle occurs, because I was going to be a Maryknoll nun. We met this priest, Father John. Well, we didn't know it was my husband's brother. And so I told Father John, I said, Father, I have to tell this story because it's so beautiful. I told Father John, I said, I won't see you till September because we're going to St. Cloud, Minnesota to see my grandmother, my dad's mother. He said, well, where does she live? Well, she lives in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And he said, he said, look up my brother. So I said, okay, not thinking anything. But when I saw him, I knew that's what God wanted me to do. He wanted me to marry Ralph. Of course, he didn't know that, but I did. So I won, and now 51 years later, we're still here. Thanks a lot, Bonnie. So I have to tell.
Whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, go.
And we're live.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Ralph Weber, the husband of Rosemarie White Weber. And as she mentioned a few minutes ago, married 51 years. And she talked about how we met. And I didn't know that was going to be the situation in marriage. But it was, and it's been a blessing. And being with her, I've learned much about prisoners of war, and as well, many of the sadnesses that she had as a result of that terrible war, and in what happened to her father, and indeed her mother, who never really quite regained her health at all. And living with someone who had lived with that privation was very, very difficult for her. And what is really amazing is, and I've told this story before, that she, and I don't know if she put this on film, but as a child they had servants, and she just dropped her clothing on the floor, and servants would braid her hair and take care of everything. And she managed then to go into camp wherein there were no servants. She had her mother, but her mother's health was so uneven that it was difficult. And then she got through high school and into nurse's training and finished that course, and then we married. And she didn't have 4 servants, she just had 1. And that worked out really, really well. I say that joshing. She became, again, she had never, ever, ever cooked prior to our marriage. So it was an exciting adventure as we managed to put together a household. And then one child would come. Well, we lost the first child, and the second child, and the third child, and the fourth child, on up. And amazing how she managed. In fact, we talk about that yet today. And do I see some of the after effects of the prison camp experience? I do. She is anxious at times about events, especially war and threat of war. And this goes back to that time. She's also thrifty, but thrifty in a good sense, so that slivers of soap are used until they don't exist anymore. And as far as clothing, again, very, very careful, low budgets in terms of acquiring them, but an awful lot of tenacity, of patience, and a good perspective on what's important, and especially important friendship and other people. As may have come out in her interview, she's deeply religious, but it's a religiosity that goes beyond simply the rosary life, but it goes into people and being concerned about them and their health and how they're doing, and if they're hungry or if they're poor, try and change that. So it's a worship of God, but at the same time a very real concern for community. And I think that, again, is in the aftermath of that prison experience. And you can't have any reruns in life, so you don't know what it would have been like if she hadn't been at Santo Tomas. But the fact that she was there, I think, was a very, very vital part of her life and of her attitude towards others, in which it is tremendous generosity and kindness. So that 51 years being married to her has been a blessing, and it's worked out well. And I don't know how much more you need, but
That's wonderful.
that's okay.
A perfect pair. We're a perfect pair.
Are we still live?
Yes. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I just want to make sure that what I would say is not going on camera.
Right.
I just wanted to add that in 1985, I got a phone call from Jane Donner Fredrickson that changed my life. As I'd mentioned earlier, we were in camp together, but then because she went, we kind of went our separate ways. She called and invited me to my first reunion, which it would have been similar to this in the sense that it was regional, and it was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And she's going to be embarrassed, but she paid my way because by then we had nine children or gifts from God, and money was tight. And she wanted me to come to the reunion, and I did go. And it was the beginning of all the reunions that I've come to. So I'll never forget that. I got to stay with her, with Bob and Jane, until Ralph came with our two babies, who are now 28 and 32. And then they also joined us for the reunion in Charlotte. And then I also wanted to say that, as I mentioned earlier, that she always said that this was her favorite reunion in Fontana. So I like to thank God for Ralph and for my mom and for our 9 children. And one time somebody was critical because we were expecting again, and Ralph said, "Now, Rosemarie, don't you feel bad, we pay our bills." And we've been blessed, and we have. And each child was wanted, and now we have 24 grandchildren, so each day is a gift. So thanks again for letting me speak, and I can't believe I've gone so far. Any other?
Yes. Can you just talk a little bit more about what your father did during the war? Just 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure. Well, when my father and Mom went over to the Philippines in 1928, they taught. And then things didn't work out so well for my dad. he had trouble keeping jobs, which we have a son that has the same problem. So then he sold he was more of a salesman. He sold Fuller Brush. He sold for Palmolive Pete. And do you remember anything else, Ralph? International Harvester. We lived 1 year in Davao, in Mindanao, and that was wonderful. Mother taught me the Calvert system. So prior to that, she had had to work to supplement the income at the Manila Daily Bulletin, and I always felt badly that she had to work, and so did she. But she was very, very courageous and loved her husband very much. And when somebody said, well, why don't you leave, Neil? She never spoke to them again, because that isn't what marriage is about. So anyway, when we went to Davao, I did live on a happier note, because Mom was home and Daddy was working for International Harvester, and he worked, and that's also, they have big hemp plants in Davao. So then when we came back to the Manila, we always kept in touch with the Maryknoll Sisters, where I was born, Harriet, in the Maryknoll Hospital, which was called St. Paul's Hospital. And when we went back to 1996, I had always sworn when we came back in 45 I would never go back, because I was so frightened. But the children encouraged. And in 1996 we went back the first time, and they gave us a big bon voyage party, and I still have pictures of that. Well, I got hooked. I went back in the year 2002. And again, it's hard to remember, because much of like our room was changed. Before it was a classroom with 40 people in it, and now it was just different. And Manila had changed too, from 1945 to 1996 to 2000. But we went to the cemetery where my father's name is on a wall. It's the what's that? Okay, are we done?
No.
No.
How much time do we
A
have?
minute, we can put in another tape.
Oh,
No.
What we wanted was,
Yes.
how did your dad go from working for International Harvester to being captured by the Japanese? Why
Oh.
was he military?
Okay, all right. Well, wait a minute, because he had trouble keeping jobs, right? So he re-enlisted.
But he was in the reserve, Darla.
Yeah.
And he came back. You tell the story about
Yes.
coming back to Riverside, or did you tell that
No,
story?
no. There's so much. Okay, all right. I can't remember exactly, Harriet, when he re-enlisted. He was in the reserve, and he re-enlisted, and he came back to this country 1940. And he was at Marsh Field, which is near Riverside, and he was a first lieutenant. And I went to school there in Riverside, and it was really fun, because Mom and I were there, and we had a house, and I got my first kiss from a boy. I didn't tell Ralph that. In Riverside, in a haystack. Oh dear. Anyway, so then we went back to the Philippines. Daddy went back on a troop ship, and Mom and I went back on a Norwegian freighter.